Okay, we're ready.
Okay. I am one of Gabe's audiologists. He has a different audiologist that works with the FM system. And I saw Gabe on Friday for an auditory processing evaluation. And what we found with that is that Gabe has difficulty with decoding of speech. And so we don't have the formal report yet from the hospital about what that is, so I wrote up something to take today so we could talk about it and you could have a copy of this. And Mom and Dad can give you a copy of the formal report from the hospital as soon as it gets back from transcription. But with decoding, that's like the basis of all auditory processing. If a child has problems with decoding, almost everything else, because it's the very basic things. He had problems especially with discriminating what different types of sounds were, like if I said cat, he might interpret that as bat. That was in a quiet situation as well, but the problem was even worse when we were in background noise or something competing with going on at the time. He has a problem with auditory recognition, with auditory closure, which means just the ability to understand what the whole word or message is if something's missing. So that's important in background noise too, but like if we stumble over words, it's going to be harder for him to understand or fill in the blanks, if that makes sense. He had a really difficult time with auditory instructions, so being able to get information through his ears, he couldn't always make sense of what I wanted him to do. He had a big problem with phonics, so he had difficulties hearing, identifying, and manipulate phonemes, and so that transfers into reading skills too. But then again, those auditory recognition of the instructions too, if you can't understand the phonemes, it's going to be hard to figure out what the teacher is saying. And then I did a test that was auditory only where he had to put sounds together. For instance, the word me, it was broken down. It said e, and he had to put that together. Kind of what we do with reading, but only auditory only, and he had a really hard time with that too. When kids have problems with decoding, reading can really be effective as well as understanding. And I have written that he had a really hard time with background noise. One of the tests I did, there was a story ongoing about dinosaurs, and you had to pick out some different words that were key during the test. I even gave him a visual format of 6 words or 6 choices that he could choose from, and a man's voice would come over and say, show me shoe. And he had a choice of 6, and he still had a hard time, like 53% correct, even though I gave him something to look at, something to hear. That's still really hard for him to process. To say all that, Gabe needs some extra help, and there are some specific recommendations that I kind of outlined. Mom and Dad were in the process of getting him an FM system, so I was really glad that we have that, especially when school is starting, because that's the first thing that's really key for him is to have that FM system. And we've talked to him about it. He needs to wear it during all school hours except during times of contact sports like recess or PE because of damage that could happen to the device. So he's aware of that. When the device is taken off during those situations, it's best just to put it in a centralized location, not to have him stick it in his pocket. And I think he knows that. But kids sometimes need help with that to remind them to put it in the right place. So there's some cases that Mom and Dad have provided there to put the devices in. The purpose of the FM system is to have the teacher talking directly into his ear without amplifying all that background noise. He's already excited about it, which a lot of times kids are not excited about this because it's something different, so I'm glad that he's really interested in wearing it because that's going to be easier for you, especially to get him to comply with that. Another thing I've suggested is that he sit in the front row during his classes. And that again is just because of the background of the situation. It's going to make your voice closer. Even though we've got that FM system, it's going to give him more advantage if he can be closer to you. That can sometimes be hard because you might be using the board, turning away from him. But that's good that we have the FM because we don't have to worry about it quite as much. But he still needs to be able to look at your face if possible. Mom and Dad share with me that he does get speech language services at this school. And I've asked them to get services outside of school as well. In the schools, we don't have enough time or money to devote to auditory processing. And so if he could get some extra therapy services outside of the school hours, that's going to really help him with his learning. We're going to things that will help him get the information in a little bit easier, maybe a little bit quicker, and work on that processing skill. It may be a slow process, every child's different, but I've got an evaluation scheduled for Gabe with a very good therapist at the hospital, so we can get that started pretty quickly. So he's got an eval coming up. Is it the 12th? 13th. Okay. Get dirty. Okay. So as soon as the therapist evaluates him, she'll decide how much therapy is needed outside the school hours and can address that. One thing at school I've recommended is that we try to reduce auditory and visual distractions, which you're probably already doing that anyways. Every school's different though. Classrooms tend to be pretty noisy environments with all the kids in the room scooting their chairs, papers, things like that. But if we could evaluate that, on your own and see if that needs to be addressed even more, that would be good. Schools also are not good acoustically because we've got, windows, we've got hard walls and floors, but that's what's best usually to keep things cleaner. So there's probably not much with that could be done. Another thing I've suggested is that Gabe have directions provided to him in written or graphic format if possible. Sometimes that's not always appropriate, like during a spelling test. You cannot provide written, I want you to spell the word cat and give that to him. That's impossible. So within reason, if we can have some pictures or reading on a level that he's at of instructions, just as another reinforcement to him visually what is expected of him, which I know that may take some extra time too. Repetition versus rephrasing of instructions is encouraged when needed. A lot of times what we tend to do is just rephrase things if a student is not getting what we want them to, but if we could say it again in the same way, that actually could be better for Gabe because he can get that information identically to the way it was presented before. Another thing that's been effective with auditory processing disorder is mnemonic devices. If you could have something with an acronym and have him remember a list of things with an acronym, that might be easier. He tends to really like music, it seems, and so that's another thing we actually suggest is putting things that he has to memorize to music. So that's another way we can kind of get the information to him. That's not just auditory only. Well, it is, but it's in a different fashion. We also recommended that things be broken down into smaller units for him because it's going to be easier for him to grasp the concepts if it's broken down a little bit smaller. Another concern with Gabe is that he is English as a second language. Mom and Dad speak American Sign Language at home, and so that is completely different than English. The word order is different. It's more like French than it is English. It's more conceptual, more visual in nature, and so Gabe tends to be a visual learner anyways because of that. Then we add on auditory processing on top of that, and it kind of is more of a disadvantage because he's got the processing concern going on too. I've also printed off some things offline from some reliable sources that I found that talks about auditory processing disorder. It's different for every child. It manifests itself a little different. So just kind of take it with a grain of salt. Gabe does have a lot of the symptoms and signs that are in here, but not all of them. So not every kid is going to exhibit all of these things. That's why I try to pick out some key things that he is having issues with and put it into the report so you can kind of pick out what you need to from what I've printed off. Then I printed off another thing just in case you need it about American Sign Language that virtually just says what I said. It's just a completely different language, and we just have to be mindful that he is ESL, and so things may not come to him like we would expect. It's hard to figure out probably at times whether it's the ASL or the auditory processing, so we just need to treat it, I guess, kind of the same. Those are the things that I wanted to lay out, and I want to answer your questions if you have any questions about the processing or the ESL.
We're going to go over this later.
Yes, we'll go over that next.
Okay.
Yes.
Probably would help to have Gabe come in and put them on.
Yeah.